and creative solution in the collection and the use of data in smaller organization. And we will have a discussion with both the UK and an international perspective. I need to start by reminding you that the session is going to be recorded. So I hope it's okay with you. And if there is anything you are uncomfortable with, you need to email it to us later on to keep it confidential. So as I said, today I am joined by 4 speakers. And this speaker will talk about some UK experience and some international experience from Latin America and India on collecting data. And I'm structuring the session with a first warm-up exercise, which is, well, I guess it's warm-up introduction to tell you, to remind you why Indigo is here and what we bring to the table and why we host this peer learning group. And Juliana and Mayra will give us some updates. And then we divided the discussion in 2 parts. One part to focus on the UK and one part to focus on Latin America and India. At the end of each of these parts, there will be time for you to pose questions. So we will have about half an hour for the UK experience, half an hour for the international experience. And at the end, we will have some time for a general discussion. Any question on how we are running the event? Throughout the session, please add your question in the chat. And we will come to them during the specific discussion or any general discussion at the end. So this is me. Why, just to remind you what Indigo is. Indigo is a data collaborative, and it brings together data enthusiasts who want to use the data to figure out how we can improve social outcome. It's a very broad umbrella. One of our contribution that we're focusing on at the moment, we compile these data set with Impact Bond project. We see them as the forefront of innovation, and they're very interesting instrument, but Indigo has the ambition to grow and include other instruments of how we can use information and data to drive better social outcome. I'll pass the word to Juliana and Mayra to give us some updates.
Great, thank you, Mara. And hi, everyone. We always take 5 minutes of our Indigo peer learning sessions to tell you what we have been up to in this past month. And I think we have some very exciting new Indigo things to show you. So the first thing I want to show you is our new Outcomes Fund directory. We know that outcome funds are becoming a prominent approach within the ecosystem of social outcomes contracting. And this is a list of all outcome funds that we know of, with standardized variables about the characteristics of these funds and links to the associated projects. This directory is in our Impact Bond dataset website, so it's there for you to use it. We have also published our first Impact Bond Insights report, which is in our GoLab publication library of publications. I'm sure Mayra will drop the link in the chat later. This is the first in a series of biannual insight reports on the adoption of social impact bonds globally. We wanted to make it really accessible and useful for practitioners and researchers, and we hope that this report and the underlying data of these reports will grow and evolve over time as the impact bond landscape becomes more mature. And then we also have a new impact bond network evolution data animation, which is really interesting, and I really like it because you can actually see how different organizations start working with impact bond projects. And you can actually see how these organizations and these new projects are building a network full of links and interconnections. I highly recommend that instead of looking at these pictures, you actually go to their website and you spend some time playing around with this data animation. You can play with the buttons of play and stop. So that will give you the possibility to zoom in into the network and to see which are the organizations that have been working with impact bonds for a long time. And as usual, all these data visualizations that we are working with, we hope that they are useful for you too. So we are happy to receive your feedback and suggestions for improvements. And now I will pass it on to Mayra.
Yes, thank you, Juliana. So, hi everyone. It's great to have you here. I will be very quick because I want us to be able to start the talk with our speakers. I just wanted to tell you about our next Hack and Learn that is coming soon. The Hack and Learn is an event that we have twice a year here in GoLab, in which we create groups to solve problems and to make better sense of how to use data. Anyone who is interested can join, and the participants can choose the challenge that they like the most. And for 2 weeks, they will work on that challenge. Some people in the group will work with data, others with research, others with writing. So it's good for us to have people with different backgrounds working on each of the challenges. The next edition, Juliana, yeah, these are the challenges we'll have in the next edition. I won't go through all of them. You can take a better look in our website. We'll also leave the link here. But the kickoff session will be in August 23rd. And then the groups will work for 2 weeks on their challenges and present their outputs and insights on a show and tell session in September 9th. So that's it. Feel free to join. And if you have any questions, you can also ask me or Juliana, and we'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Okay. So back to the plan for today. As I said, there are two main parts. In the first part,
normally this is mentioned on the website, but apparently something changed.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, we have two parts, and we'll dive in the first part where we talk about data labs in the UK, and we have Tracy from the Legal Education Foundation, the Justice Data Lab, and Rosario Piazza from Think NPC. Tracy brings a lot of experience on the use of data to inform decision making. She has a passion for quantitative data to inform decision, and her organization has a passion to see how we can provide access to justice services to everybody. So and they have strong equity considerations. And we have Rosario from Think NPC, as you might know, is a leading think tank and consultancy that focuses on the charity sector. Again, in the UK, he has been doing a lot of innovative work on how we can improve the sector effectiveness. And one of his latest project and innovation is this employment data lab. He might mention when we come to him. I'm giving the speaker up to 10 minutes each. I suggest we will have Tracy present. If you have any question, put it in the chat. Then we have Rosario, and then we stop to have a general discussion of what we've heard. So Tracy, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Mara. Next slide, please. So I'm going to have a quick, I'll definitely stick to the 10 minutes about looking at data needs of smaller charities. This is just my Twitter address. If you want to kind of tweet me, I'm happy to do that. Contact me. Next, please. So I'll just quickly say who I am. I am the Community Data Principal, and I work in a team called the Justice Lab for the Legal Education Foundation. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But specifically, my role is about supporting organizations, nonprofit organizations, about how to collect, manage their data more effectively. We want to be able to support this the sector, which is access to justice. This is organizations that provide legal advice to people, to really kind of support them, to kind of show the value of their work, and also to build up the research and evidence base in this sector, which has largely been under-researched. So the idea for the foundation is to do more work in this area. As Mara correctly said, I'm very passionate about data. I love it. I'm a bit of a data geek. And in my spare time, I do other data bits too. So I work in supporting Black communities to understand data and technology and how it and the impacts of sort of AI and automated decision-making systems is an area of interest. And I also volunteer at TechSoup Connect London, which used to be called Net Squared London, which is focused about supporting smaller charities with their data use. And previously, I used to work at DataKind UK, which is a charity that supports charities to use data science, and NPC in something very similar called the Justice Data Lab. So I've moved from one job called Justice Data Lab to another job called Justice Lab. And Rosaria I know very well. So next slide, please. And the Legal Education Foundation, it's a grant-making foundation. It gives around £6 million a year to organisations that work in the access to justice sector and support people giving legal advice. And within that Legal Education Foundation, we are focused in the Justice Lab team, as I've mentioned, about increasing the quality and availability of justice system data. A lot of work has been done by my director, Dr. Natalie Byram, looking at data that's held in Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Services, so government data, and how do we get access to some of the government administrative data to enable more research. And I'm on the other spectrum of things about data from the ground and getting data out of the access to justice organisations themselves. Overall, we want to, as I mentioned, increase the amount of robust research that takes place in the justice system. We're actually sort of working on a match control project right now to see how we can kind of get a better understanding of how legal support provides people that are in sort of tenuous housing situations, and working with a council to get access to data and struggling through all the normal data issues that you get from doing this work in terms of data sharing. And then generally just building up research skills within the sector, getting researchers to get more interested in access to justice. Next slide, please. So I'm going to focus on small charities just for now, with part of the hats that I wear. And I was really interested and taken by a new study that came out recently, the Charity Digital Skills Survey. If you have the next slide, please. And it's quite a small sample, it's 365, but given that we're in a pandemic, I feel that's quite good. It's a really helpful resource in the UK, and it's produced by Zoe Amar Digital Skills Platform and Think Social Tech, where they went out and did this survey looking at what's the digital skills for the charity sector in the UK, and got 365 responses. 50% of them were organisations under 1 million. So I thought it'd be useful just to kind of have a little dig around this data set, and I got an extract from them for that team to do that. So next slide. And what I thought was really interesting, that they asked the organisations to rate their skills. And what I did was I pulled out where they said that they felt that it was very poor. Sorry that the table is quite small, but a lot of small charities think they're poor, 59% on advanced data use, which is using web data or statistics to plan services. Given that I sometimes do automated decision-making systems, I don't find that very advanced, but I can see that some people will find that advanced. It's interesting that quite a lot of organizations struggle with that. I thought it was a little bit concerning that 44% think it's had poor skills, rated themselves poor on cybersecurity, and just given about how dependent we are on IT and technology today, that definitely shows that there are some issues around that. And then generally, again, using, managing, and analysing data, 44% of small charities had this difficulty. When compared to large charities, that's sort of 30% said that they were poor in using, managing data. So there is a bit of a gap between smaller charities and larger charities in terms of perhaps confidence, because this is self-perception as well, in the skills that they have. But I will also caution that with the small charities, these are small samples, but in sort of general practice, I've seen this kind of on the ground as well. Next slide, please. They were then asked to kind of discuss their digital priorities in the next 12 months. And then what I thought was interesting was that small, medium, large charities, well, within this range of priorities they all said improving their website and an online presence on social media is like one of their key things. But interestingly, medium and large charities said they wanted to use data more effectively. That came up in the top 3, whereas it didn't for small charities. Instead, the small charities are focusing about getting some more money through online fundraising, but most importantly as well about ensuring that they reach and meet the needs of more diverse users, which I think again speaks to small charities being on the ground and be able to kind of and focused on their sort of local areas or networks that they're working in. Next slide, please. And then there was another question here about what do you think you're going to be invested in post-pandemic? And then again, I thought that was quite interesting that smaller charities, which I've highlighted in pink, they had the lowest response in terms of investing more data and skills and infrastructure compared to like a wider gap between larger and medium-sized charities. So that's the 1, 2, 3, 4th row down the line. Whereas for them, the biggest priorities for them was about offering services online and in person, so that kind of blended approach that many organizations are grappling with of, you know, digital, online, or meeting, going back to in person, and how do they deliver their services. Next slide. So hopefully I think that gives you a bit of food for thought. I thought I would dive into a project that I did pre-pandemic. So my years are all muddled up. So I think it was 2019 that I did it. And I worked with another fantastic local infrastructure body called Superhighways that support, and we were doing a project to support small charities that work in London in refugee and migrant sector. So next slide, please. There's a website that you can go because we put all our resources out there. But what I just wanted to highlight was that small charities, just like all the charity sector, are very varied, and they have a huge amount of data skills from low, medium to extraordinary high, can sometimes beat some of the large charities. So it can be really varied. We worked with very small organizations. So for them, what we realized it was everything that we showed them, supported them with, had to be directly relevant to their work. They needed to be able to kind of pick this up and make use of it straight away, or explain how and why that was relevant to them. Getting their time was really difficult, but they were willing to give it if they knew that it was going to support their work. And for this, we did a lot of some of the basics, such as, you know, theory of change type work, explaining to them what GDPR, our data protection legislation, is about. How do they use their own data to kind of show the needs of the community, and how do you access government data sets so that you can kind of compare and contrast so that you understand some of the needs in your local areas. And for some of these organizations, they had no idea that these data sets were available and could be used by them. Some of these data sets have been really simplified now to be sort of click and can be quite accessible to kind of show you a range of socio-demographic data for your local area. Next slide, please. So I'm going to end with just one last slide, just kind of summarizing needs, challenges, opportunities, and I've restricted myself to 2 bullet points each, because otherwise I could go on and on about this. But needs, as I've mentioned, I think it's really important to support small charities to see the value of data. If they don't see the value of the data, they won't prioritize it. And I think that's what you see in terms of the stats in the Charity Digital survey that I presented. Another key thing, of course, is that it needs to be directly relevant to their work. Some of the challenges I've seen, I've put 3, but I kind of cheated and used only 1 bullet point, but skills, time, resources to work with data. A lot of these organizations aren't funded to do infrastructure type work, so they don't get extra, it's usually kind of project based, and sometimes they don't have data, don't have the funds to kind of do work with data. It's an additional piece. And so the last thing is about opportunities, that despite this, I think it's really exciting to work with small charities. They really are close to the ground truth. I think this has been really illustrated by what's taken place in COVID-19, the fact that we really relied on people right on the ground to know where to put food parcels or who to connect to. It was really actually grassroots and mutual aid organizations that got together and led on this. And I think there's more realization from local authorities, particularly about the strength that can be found in communities. And also generally working, I found it really helpful that just being small, they sometimes can be very agile. Decisions can be made quite quickly. You can get right up in front of the chief exec at times. So that's all been sort of really helpful, and it can make making changes much quicker. So next slide. So yeah, that's me. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully I've stuck to 10 minutes, but as I said, I could wax on quite a lot about this, so I'm going to stop myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Fascinating. Great to see the survey and how you distilled what are the needs and opportunity there. There are already some questions for you in the chat, so you can cast an eye on the question as we move on to Rosario. As I said at the beginning, Rosario is based at Think NPC, and like Tracy, is a data enthusiast. One of the projects that he's cooking is this employment data lab as well. But I'll leave the floor to you, 10 minutes, and then we come back for questions. And again, post question as we go along, and so that we don't forget them.
Thank you, Mara. I'll do my best to stick to the time. So next slide, please. So if you're not familiar with NPC, which stands for New Philanthropy Capital, we're a charity think tank, and we support the social sector to be able to measure their impact and therefore improve the lives of the people they serve. Next, please. So you heard about the labs. So what on earth are those labs that we're talking about? We normally refer to them as impact labs, and but to give you a better understanding of what the labs are about, I'm going to focus today about two examples. One, which has been up and running for a while, the Justice Data Lab that Tracy mentioned before, and the other one, which is currently in the pilot phase, if you like, which is the Employment Data Labs. So the data labs, Justice one is run by the Minister of Justice, and the Employment one is run by DWP, are services that provide charities and funders around the country with free access to impact measurement and reporting, a solid statistical alternative to randomized controlled trial, which I'm sure you well know that is very costly and hard to get right, and then access to comparison group and analytical expertise that otherwise will be quite costly and prohibitive. So just to give you an overview of how the labs work, they use the same principle and methodologies, if you like. So if you're an organization, let's say, supporting ex-offenders or young people who are looking for employment and training opportunities, you submit your data to the lab team. The data, so your data, which is effectively the treatment group, will be matched by the team of analysts at the MOJ or DWP against their database. And I'm going to give you a concrete example shortly. And this allows for the creation effectively of the control group, your comparison group. And they use a technique called propensity score matching. And again, I'm going to cover this in a second. And then once the two groups are identified, the intervention is measured against, let's say, reoffending or employment rate and sustained employment to understand what has been the impact of the intervention. And once the data is aggregated and analyzed, then it's published in a report. And the caveat there is that regardless of the results, any impact report is published. So why it's really powerful is because you can have access to a plethora of examples, if you like, maybe similar to the interventions that you're running, to see what works and what doesn't. Next, please. Thank you. So I'm going to take the Justice Data Lab as an example to show you what it means, basically. So they use the Police National Computer Database to match your beneficiaries' data, if you like, against what is going to be the control group. And let's say that, for instance, you submit individual level data about 175 of the beneficiaries that you've supported through your intervention, and then through propensity score matching, which is essentially, it's a statistical technique that attempts to estimate the effect of a treatment by accounting for covariates, by which I mean the characteristics of the participants, those who attended or received support from your intervention, to predict what is the impact of the treatment against a control group, basically a group of individuals with very similar characteristics. And don't worry if it doesn't make sense, I have a better example coming next soon. So once the matching is done, which is likely to be just for a proportion of that treatment group, so your beneficiaries, because again, all these different characteristics, demographics or interventions or employment history, offending history, etc., are matched, a smaller sample is identified, which is then compared to see what is the impact of the intervention that you have delivered. And again, as I mentioned before, once aggregated, the data will be published in a report. An example would be 70% committed a proven reoffense within 1 year period after they received the intervention. Next, please. So I mentioned propensity score matching. What it means in practice, to give you an example, is that it takes into account different factors, which we kind of split in two groups, if you like. Those static factors, which is the social demographic characteristics, gender, ethnicity, nationality, etc., but also dynamic risk factors, which are in this case, in this example, are linked to reoffending. And a really good example is the OASIS variable. So it's a data set available to MOJ, which includes a series of kind of characteristic and then reoffending history of the people recorded into their system, which is then used to create the comparison group. Moving forward, please. Next. Thank you. So what it looks like in practice once the report is produced, and I'm using an example from Clinks, which is a charity, a UK-based charity, is that you might get, in case your intervention is effective, you might get a report which tells you to what extent or what proportion, if you like, the percentage point in this case, your intervention has been successful in reducing reoffending rate. And the report is, if you've never seen this before, I definitely recommend to check the website because it's plenty of reports, examples, and an explanation of the methodology. But effectively, it tells you to what extent your intervention has been successful and therefore what has been the actual impact of the intervention that you've been delivering. And similarly, assuming that the intervention has not been successful, will give you data that allows you to understand how and where and to what extent it didn't succeed. Next, please. Right, so going into the challenges and barriers, if you click next again, there should be, yeah, keep going. We use this metaphor to talk about impact. It's hard. We're absolutely aware, whether you're a small charity or a larger charity, is definitely hard to be able to measure impact. It's like climbing a really big mountain. And often we tend to forget that in order to get to the summit, you actually need to go through certain stages and steps first. So it's not just about impact, but it's also about the mechanism of change, the intermediate outcomes, how this relate to your theory of change, your mission, and what it is that you're trying to achieve. But also, it's not just about quantitative data, which, yes, it's important. It's also about qualitative data, which is often underestimated, but actually contain lots of useful information that can help you understand to what extent and how beneficiaries experience your services and what kind of change, long-lasting change, they get out of it. Next. Thank you. And this is just a list of, very much like Tracy, we could go on forever about the barriers to effective impact measurement, but I tried to summarize in a short list issues that are fairly common, across small and medium-sized charities and large charities, but funders as well. We tend to kind of distinguish the two, but really quite often they're struggling with the same kind of issues when it comes to impact measurement. So there is a lack of data standards and taxonomy. I always use this metaphor of the Tower of Babel syndrome, whereby professionals or people working in a specific sector use completely different terminology to actually refer to or describe the exact same phenomenon. There is a lack of benchmarking and comparison data, and that's one of the reasons why we love the justice and employment data labs, because actually it's free access to not just expertise and analytical skills, but also good comparison data. As I mentioned, there's too much emphasis on quantitative data and very little on qualitative data. They're both important, and sometimes actually the latter could be more important than the former. Data maturity is an issue. Again, the stats that Tracy shared with us today give us a sense of also the gap between, you know, the reality and how people perceive themselves, and the different kind of value and importance that we attach to data, and all the different things that we can do with data. There is always a tension between big data sets and small data. Sometimes, in my experience, some charities, particularly the small ones, they don't think that they are equipped enough to run any complex or even meaningful analysis, because they believe that they're working with a too small group of beneficiaries. And I keep saying there's no such thing as a too small group. You should definitely try to make use of the data that you collect. And last but not least, obviously, we're all charities, and we struggle with the same problem, which is a limited amount of financial and human resources. Next, please. But let's talk about opportunities and what is the potential of accessing government data. This is just a few examples of areas, of impact, of things that you might want to explore, and existing data that could be accessed directly or through some of the initiatives that we have shared with you today. I'm not going to go through the list in the interest of time, but this is to say that there are resources available out there. And again, building on what Tracy was saying before, sometimes the data is out there, it's open source, can be downloaded and used. People don't necessarily know that. And we know that there is a responsibility on government departments, ONS is a good example, to make sure that that data becomes even more accessible, people are aware of it, and becomes even more user-friendly. Next, please. So there are also problems linked to the approach that I shared with you today. So again, the Justice Data Lab and the Employment Data Lab. There is always a risk of oversimplification or creating almost kind of league tables, competitions between those charities delivering maybe interventions that have been proven to be successful and those who are not successful. Competition is good, but sometimes it's best to put egos aside and to learn from each other, if possible. A caveat with the analysis performed through the labs, it's obviously the fact that those are estimates. So these are proxy. There's no like perfect formula which will tell you this intervention is the best intervention to fix X, Y, and Z issues. But again, the real value here is that we can learn and share from others as well. A bit of attrition, that's inevitable, especially when you get results that are not necessarily what you expected, in case your impact has not been as great as you imagined, or maybe it's been negative as opposed to positive. And there is still need for us to consider what other types of data we need to collect when we are evaluating and monitoring the interventions that we deliver. Engagement data, feedback from your users or beneficiaries, and outcomes data as well. Next, please. And then lastly, I wanted to give you an update of where we are with similar initiatives. The Justice Data Lab is right at where we are currently, if you like. We use this to kind of showcase the evolution, the stage of the evolution of all these different labs. The Employment Data Lab, as I mentioned, is currently in pilot phase. DWP is meant to publish new guidelines, and the initial results of the pilot that they managed to carry out right before the pandemic, they have to pause, unfortunately, as you imagine. And then the Health Data Lab, that's a tricky one, because dealing with sensitive data and NHS and then NHS Digital, which is two slightly different things, it's a bit tricky. And Education Lab, we are currently in conversation with the Education Endowment Foundation that was tasked a few years back to look into this. And we're also exploring other examples like access to higher educations or the impact on interventions on training skills, etc. Next. And that's it, I'm afraid. Again, I could go on forever, but I'm going to shut up in the interest of time.
Thank you. I really like your era and seeing the dinosaur. Like I'll come back to that. I will circulate the slides. I had a question: how do you define data maturity? And I could see how you define data maturity in terms of geological eras. So we have lots of questions for Tracy. There is an interesting debate happening in the chat that I would like to bring to the fore. Fire away with question for Rosario. I think you will. There are already some for you and more to come. I wonder if you can start. Elle, you had a quick conversation with Tracy on supporting this small organization on understanding what is a unit of analysis. What does it mean, unit of analysis?
Thanks, Mara, and thanks, Tracy and Rosario. I was just thinking as you were talking, Tracy, that there are different things happening here. Some of this is information about people and access. Some of this is about moments or events. And you also talked about a system. And these are different things and might have different bits of data attached to them. And I think sometimes it can be a bit bewildering to know how these different things connect to each other. And in part, I think it's an apples and pears problem, or maybe the Tower of Babel that Rosario mentioned. But I think it's also a kind of, is this a piece of fruit or a fruit bowl question as well? And I think that, in my experience, that's really hard to sort of work through. So I was just interested in terms of how that's featured in your work so far, and if you have any tips on how to navigate some of the jumble.
Yeah, I think there is lots of terms and terminologies that are really off-putting to people: evidence, insight, impact, outputs, outcomes. There's still a lot of confusion about that all, despite some really great programs that have tried to kind of clear it, like Inspire and Impact was a good program that we often push charities towards. I think often I just try to avoid any type of jargon whatsoever and really start with listening to what is the actual need of the charity. And so what I put in the chat was really trying to understand what is it that the charity is trying to achieve. You know, what are some of the questions that they face? And then let's think about what information do you need in order to help you to answer those questions. And then it's, for many small charities, they don't often recognize that there are open data that's available that could help them to answer the questions. And sometimes we help to sort of signpost them to that. And I think also as well, it's not just about signposting to here's a tool. Sometimes they need a bit of hand-holding as well in terms of explaining what's going on, because sometimes a lot of the data sets that are available are quite difficult to navigate. So it's about providing that level of support. But I think it really does break down to what is the problem that you're facing, to kind of help organizations to think through what's the best unit of analysis, I think you use, but what is the best type of data that is required to help them solve that problem. I see that Caroline's got her hand up.
Caroline, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to follow on this conversation, which was happening in the chat about Tracy's comments. And I think it's related to something I mentioned, you know, working with charities. As someone described it in the chat, is, you know, they focus on the ends of the data, like needing it for accountability to funders and things like that. But we found that when, for example, we work with an organization like that, that is trying to collect data for a purpose like that, but then we work with them to develop, you know, the logic model for their organization and kind of think about what are those pathways by which they think they have impacts. And it often kind of enlightens them to thinking of, well, there's a data that maybe the funder would want us to collect, but we need this information for understanding whether we're doing right, for making choices about our programs and things like that. So I find that, you know, if you only focus on the ends, it becomes, you know, like an obligation that they do and only do it for that specific purpose. And it doesn't really enrich the organization's understanding of how data can be valuable, versus if you let them, you know, if they get the perspective is that, oh, this is actually really useful to us because maybe we're putting too many resources here and we could be more, and we're more effective here. So things like that. So I think that I just wanted to add that to the conversation that was going in the chat there, because it connected.
Yes, and I completely agree about that. Often enough, the funders, I can't remember who else put that on the chat that spoke about the funders, drive the direction about collecting data. And so actually you find that charities do collect a lot of data, but actually it's just feeding this funding machine. And often because, and if we're thinking about smaller charities as well, they're really much trying to deliver services. So to take that time to kind of step back a bit, reflect and think about all the data that they have and how it can help them to inform how their services are being delivered is not time that they often get to do, which is helpful that you mentioned about like the logic models, or what I said, theory of change. That's very similar, kind of having some approach that gets an organization to think about, you know, the wider picture and draws them back to what are you here for? What are you trying to do? And really kind of make data be a part of that, part of their understanding of how that can help them to track, you know, that they're on the right direction is really important.
Okay, can I bring you in, Quentin, with your question? Can you share it with the group?
Oh, I'd be glad to. And I also think it relates to what Rosario said. He was talking, Rosario, you mentioned qualitative data. And what I was just saying is I think you know, in the survey, there was not a whole lot of use of user data to improve services. And I think they're related, because I do think qualitative information about what the end users need is vital. I do understand, and I think it's because of methodology questions and maybe lack of awareness of tools. I can see why small charities wouldn't do that, but I think it's a real opportunity for improvement.
Oh, sorry, can I go? Yeah, I absolutely hear you. So before NPC, actually, I used to work for a very small charity, and we faced exactly the same problem. So I spent a bit of time digging. That's, you know, the kind of set things I do in my free time is to look for more tools to use and more data. And there is a piece of software, for instance, which is free, and it does great things with qualitative data. It's called QDA Miner. And essentially, you know, if I have to oversimplify it, it's a bit of coding, right? So you're looking for keywords. And to give you an example, the way we used it was we were trying to understand whether there was any risk of gang violence for the young people who were applying for grants for the charities I was working for at the time, which is Bottle UK. And we actually realized that I think it was about 60% of referral workers who were referring to us, young people, actually mentioned those keywords, or, you know, similar words in their application. So we realized that there was a need for us to reconsider what was in practice the grants that we were providing them for, what was going to do, what kind of activities we could pay for. And we use that in a dynamic way. So it's not that you find a piece of information and then you stick to that for ages. Now and then it's good practice to, you know, look for keywords, also talk with other charities doing similar work, talk directly with the referral agencies, the local authorities we were in partnership with, to understand how issues are changing over time. There's also, you know, different people, as I mentioned before, use slightly different language to describe the same thing. So can we use that? And you don't have to do this across all of the data set that you have, especially if you're dealing with big data. You can just extract samples outside of specific grant programs, interventions, and then work with small sample and then roll out and try to understand what is that the data is telling you. And then specifically on the intervention, user feedback, you know, qualitative data, it's one of the most powerful pieces of information. The users themselves are telling you this is working and this is why it's working, this is not working and this is why it's not working.
Thank you, Rosario. I find that the qualitative data is really rich, but it's a hard work because it needs to be coded. And as you said, there are different words to describe the same concept. So maybe this is why there is this tendency, but more to be done there. I just point your attention to Ian asking if you can drop the name of the software you mentioned in the chat, because he would like to check it out. There were a couple of questions for you, Rosario, on the methodology, very technical, on Elle laughs because she is the guilty one asking the technical questions on the sample might be a bit small. What is business as usual? Do we know how do we do business as usual? And also Shirley had a question on potential bias embedded in a propensity score matching methods?
Yeah, I start from the latter because I already replied in the chat, but I would say generally there is a risk of data being biased and it goes for every piece of information because it's humans who input the data and create the data in the first place. And I can mention an example. So recently the ONS have created a task force to look at inclusive data. What they means by that is that after maybe what is a very long period of time, they realize that the census data and the categories that we use here in the UK are not necessarily representative of how people will describe themselves, their characteristics, their experience, and it obviously goes for gender, ethnicity, etc., etc. So, but the real problem there is not the ONS and the way to do things, or maybe it is, I don't know. I'm not fit to pass judgment on that, but it's how we collect data, how we describe things, and we are biased because again, we are humans. So the reason why it's important I always say, make your users, your beneficiaries, they are your best allies because they can tell you what's working and what's not working. Also, not just for the interventions, but thinking about the way you describe the issues and experiences they're going through. So my advice will be, whether possible, to create almost like a small advisory group made of the people that you are supporting, because sometimes, and this is particularly the case, there is a way of describing this phenomenon in the international development sector, which is you have that huge divide between the global north and the global south, right? You're someone who is maybe coming from a privileged background, most often white, who goes into poor countries saying, we know what your problems are, we know what you're struggling with, we're gonna fix it. But at no point in time they ask those questions in the first place to the people who are experiencing those issues on the ground. Is, you know, the description of the needs, the support they need, that they are looking for, is it really reflective of what they're going through? Is the way that we describe individuals, people, really representative of what is the reality on the ground? Chances are most of the time it's not. It's just a partial picture. So going back to the point of bias, yes, there is definitely a risk of bias, but that's why, you know, the more we use initiatives like the lab, so the more we talk about data and the limitations of data, the more we can have an open, honest conversation and get past or address and mitigate, whether possible, those biases and the stereotypes. It's embedded in the human brain. We can't get rid of it, unfortunately, but there are ways, you know, to work around it. And what was the other question about the technical one?
Maybe we'll pick up at the end, because I would like to give the floor to Maria Laura and Neha for the next half an hour. But the question was on the size of the sample. If you have small charities and the numbers are small, do you have enough statistical power? And what is the comparator group? Do we have a sense of business as usual? Do we have access to this data, or you compare a charity to one another charity? So those are the questions that we have. So thank you so much. This is really thought-provoking. And one of the things I take away is the importance to look at data as a tool for understanding, for this organization to understand their own theory of change, and using this data to see where they are adding value. So there is a misunderstanding of the use of data, a focus on the qualitative one, and this seems really hard work. So there is some awareness raising that we might need to consider. I'll move us along to, I'll take you to Latin America and to India to look at the experience of colleagues in other necks of the woods. And we have with us Maria Laura Tinelli. Maria Laura is the founder of and the director of Acrux Partners, is an impact investment intermediary. And she is a great advocate of creating an ecosystem. She's been working the National Advisory Board with Social Finance UK, and with she created the Latin American Outcomes Payment Network. So she brings a strong outcome-based contracting flavor to this that is data heavy, often working with a small organization. And then we'll hear from Nia from India. Can I give the floor to you, Malala?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mara, and thank you, everybody. It's extremely interesting to hear our colleagues, and it reminded me of my days working for the not-for-profit sector in the UK and elsewhere. And many of the challenges you mentioned, I've faced or I've seen other partners face. So I don't have a presentation for you today because a lot of the data that I could have shared to exemplify what I'm going to talk about, it's still private. So I could have shared with anonymizing all the names, and it becomes just numbers on the screen. So very boring. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on in Latin America, and more specifically in the outcome payment contract that we are finalizing next year in Argentina. So just to give you a little bit of context, this SIB is the first one that was launched in Argentina, and one of the first ones in Latin America, and one of the first ones in Latin America that will end successfully together with the Colombian SIBs. Many of the other SIBs in Latin America have launched and failed, or failed to launch for a variety of reasons. But the Argentina SIB, despite the volatility of the macroeconomic situation in the country and many other sort of headwinds that we have faced because of COVID and because of the macroeconomic situation, it's still going well, and it's still proving the results. And on the proving of the results is where I want to double click today, because that's where the data comes in, and the importance of data and how we are exemplifying why this tool works, because we have access to the data. And data is not a minor thing, not for the government, not for the investors, not for the organizations that are the service providers of the SIB, or more broadly in Argentina, because data is routinely manipulated by government officials, or by the government central body that is supposed to produce the data, that where you can base some of your decisions with, whether you're the government or whether you are the private sector. Data is also squirreled away by the ones that have it, and it has a very high cost, especially in Argentina or in countries in Latin America, because of the lack of data. The data that you find, it's sometimes proxy, it's sometimes rigged, because you cannot trust the government authorities that are producing it. So data comes at and good data comes at a very high cost. And data is also power, because exposing certain data points will mean that you expose certain programs from the government, for example, or from other organizations that have done it in the past, that do not paint such a rosy picture in terms of what are the poverty levels of a country, what are the education levels of a country, and so on and so forth. So, and what is the success, more importantly, of the programs that you incorporate. So I'll do a little bit of before the SIB launch, and now that the SIB is about to end. Before the SIB launch, we were asking very basic questions, both to the government and to the service providers we wanted to work with, in terms of what were the success rates of the programs that they were very used to implementing on employability of very underprivileged youth in a particular part of the country, which is the city of Buenos Aires, which is the capital city of Argentina. So this basic question to build the design of the SIB and how we were going to design the metrics and how we were going to pay for the metrics, how much, etc., was missing. They only had anecdotal evidence. And I remember always this man from one of the largest NGOs that we work with, that he used to use a word that he invented that was a masomenometro. So it's a more or less meter. And he did this with his hand every time he said this. And he said, well, we don't have the data, but we roughly think it's around here. Their estimation now, 4 years down the line, was actually pretty accurate. This mix of years of experience on the ground, picking other data points and working with the population that we were seeking to work. So their experience was pretty accurate, and their those data points plus some data points from the governments were the ones that we use to design the metrics, and the metrics seem to have worked over the years. So I think one of the things that I wanted to mention is that you don't necessarily, I mean, you do need data, and you do need robust data to base your decisions in, and to base your design in, and to base your analysis in. But you also need a lot of qualitative data that comes with both experience and what you're asking those that you're trying to benefit from, which is data that they had and in abundance. So most of the service providers that we were working with to design the SIP did not necessarily have robust sets of quantitative data, but they have tons of qualitative data. And to your point, Mara, it's difficult to use qualitative data. Yes, it is, but it's not so far from reality. It's not if you use it well, and if you use it wisely, you can build on it. You don't necessarily need to have the perfect data sets from a quantitative perspective. So that's sort of before the SIP. The government didn't have data to inform on success rates, or on how much we should pay for each result, and so on and so forth. So we had to build that data from scratch, and then in a way prove that the data that we had built to design the SIP was valid through the implementation of the SIP, and through the now, yes, very systematic picking up of quantitative and qualitative data on a monthly basis, and reporting that data and using that data to adapt the program as we went along. So in a way, what we're doing now is discovering that many of the data points that we had built from scratch are now being validated by other kinds of data that we are picking up in a more systematic manner. In terms of how useful this data is for the smaller organizations, or for the organizations that we're working with, it is extremely important for them, and this is in their own words. When we interviewed them at half point, and now we're interviewing them again at the end of the SIP, although at the beginning they were complaining about the amount of data that they needed to pick up and hand over on a monthly basis, and how they were going to be measured against very quantitative KPIs on top of the qualitative. Now, 4 years down the line, they don't see that as a massive burden anymore, because they can use this data. This is from the service providers' viewpoint, which are 4 NGOs. The data that we have been picking up, and they have been picking up, and we are very transparent with the data. So they not only get to see their own data, but also they get to see the data from their peers. So it's a very open source thing inside the Argentina SIP community, if you like, by which they all learn from one another. That's one of the objectives of the SIP, underlying objectives. So they all need to see the data from one another. And that has created a series of incentives, this transparency, full transparency of data within the service providers team and within the investors team creates a lot of healthy competition. Why? Because they're able to see with very strong numbers who's doing better where, in which indicators, who can learn from the other one, how they can progress in their journey to producing better results with the individuals that we're trying to work with, and where they need to sort of get better at. So what seemed like a burden at the beginning for especially the 2 smaller organizations, now it's a competitive advantage that they're using to pitch for funding in future rounds of government contracts and private contracts that they're going for. And this is set from their own words. Second thing I want to mention is somehow we need to make the use of data a lot easier and a lot more transparent. And it is something that, especially on the outcome payment contracts world, doesn't happen. And we could all benefit so much if we were able to share a lot more of data than what we currently do, because it will inform decision making. It will fast track the process of designing better metrics. It will help other countries into identifying, like the service providers in the Argentine SIP can look at one another and compare notes and say, okay, I need to get better in this, or I could be doing this instead of what I'm doing. We need to do that at a more global level and be a lot more open in the sharing of data, because that is not happening yet. And hence it takes forever and it takes a lot of money to build a SIP from scratch in countries where you don't have access to robust data from the government or from the likes of NPC and others, like it is the case in the UK. So especially for emerging markets and for markets that are beginning in their outcome contracts journey, if they don't have access to data that might be coming from another country or that might be coming from other sources within that particular region or country, it's very costly for them to develop SIPs. And that's the reason, in my opinion, of why SIPs take so long to sort of catch fire in the regions of the world where data is not in abundance, where data is bad, where data is super expensive, and where you cannot access data from other countries either to inform your decisions. So that's one of the points I wanted to make. The other point is the reverse of that is all this data is flowing to the investors, but in a way, it's not a relationship with data like I've seen in the founder model of NGOs, and then whomever is a founder, it could be a multilateral, it could be a private philanthropist, will demand the data, and then you don't know where the data goes, what happens with the data. Most of the time, nothing happens with the data. In a SIP context, again, the full transparency of data and the full 360 flow of data and decision making between investors and between the service provider, pretty much them behaving like investors as if they were in a fund investing in companies and also allowing this flow of data to happen, is what has enabled many of the adaptations that we had to carry out on the Argentine SIP in order to overcome the barriers that we were facing from a context perspective, from a COVID, macroeconomic, political, etc. So this data that investors have access to and that service providers have access to, and this 100% flow of data in the two directions, is what actually enables the SIP to progress and enables the service providers to achieve better results, which in turn enable better results for the investors. So investors, for example, now know what service provider provides a better return for the 12-month sustaining of employment metric versus the 4 months. So if in the future they want to focus on long-term sustainability of employment, they can work with that particular service provider model versus the other, and so on and so forth. So transparency of data within the flow of decision-making within the team that is managing the project is key. And the last thing I want to say.
Yeah, can I ask to summarize? I want to give the floor to Neha.
Yeah. Last thing is we need to make better use of technology, blockchain especially. We need to crack it there, and we need to start using it to, not only for outcome contracts, but for overall development contracts in a broader context. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Malala. Maybe one day we need to look at blockchain. It comes up sometimes in this conversation, and have a peer learning group on what are the opportunities.
Absolutely. We're beginning to look at it, but we don't understand it yet.
So, thank you so much. Malala, please post questions. Really interesting to read about the transparency and the learning that is happening. I would be curious to see if these small organizations providing services will continue to use the data that way, even after the contract is finished. So this is very curious, like something that I would like to find out. Neha, I'm coming to you. So you are the research manager at Ashoka University at the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy. Can I share that you are an intersectional feminist as well as a social science researcher? I love that you share this because it shows that in your research, you're really reflective on what you bring and how the lens you put on things. Yes. So curious to hear from your experience. 10 minutes to you, and then we come to Q&A.
Okay, so I'm basically a qualitative researcher, and I'll be speaking from my experiences that I had while engaging with data and grassroots organizations over years, in different parts of India. So when we are talking about grassroots organizations, I'm saying like really, really small organizations with little to no funds and literally, very poor infrastructure in terms of, creating data or using data. the way we understand data at grassroots organizations in India might be very different from the way it is, kind of seen by data analysts in, let's say academia or research organizations. So next slide, please. So basically, I'll start by saying that, everybody has data. All the stakeholders in, social impact space in India, be it government, be it NGOs, be it, funders or anybody, academia, for example, they all collect data, they all use data. So when we talk about grassroots organizations data, it might not be in a form which is published. It might not be in the form of a sophisticated data set, but they do collect huge quantities of data as part of their everyday operations. They make note of the details of the cases they intervene in their everyday operations, and they use those details of the cases not only for their present interventions but also to inform their future interventions. But it is all very limited to their own work. When similarly, all these other types of organizations, government or academia, etc., they all have their own data sets or some sort of data that exists. But the problem is that all this data exists in silos. And that is where, it becomes really, really difficult for, grassroots organizations to kind of prove that this problem is there and it needs to be solved in a certain manner. So I will try and talk about the various ways in which grassroots organizations are trying to find ways within this problem where they face the challenges of, poor funds, poor networking, lack of uniformity of language when it comes to, India and language and other terminologies, etc., ways of working, ways of recording, etc. So how small organizations are being able to navigate these challenges to, create opportunities for themselves to maximize the impact of data that exists, maybe in silos, even if in silos. Next, please. So when we talk about opportunities for repurposing data, one of the most obvious, but still one of the most important thing is to have collaborations, because everything is so widely, placed. So when I'm saying collaborations, I mean government, NGOs, academia, intermediary organizations, data analytics firms, etc. All of them need to come together to find solution to one problem, to find, a way to tell what is the problem, for example, to begin with. So here I really want to share this example. There is a small organization, small in terms of funds, but really big in terms of its impacts, Priyas. So Priyas does not have a lot of funds to kind of collect data and have a sophisticated data set to, make a point. So this organization during COVID, what happened was, this organization works with prisoners awaiting trial. And during COVID, there was, even in other times it is, but during COVID, there was overcrowding, and which could have led to, really fatal consequences for prisoners within the prisons. They had an idea where they wanted to solve this problem, but they didn't have a data to prove. So what they did was they collaborated with, they partnered with their partner NGOs, and they also approached prisons, which is a government organization, to get that data to prove that, okay, this should be the number which should be, there. This should be the number of prisoners in a particular prison, but right now it is hugely overcrowded. They took it to the court, and Supreme Court ultimately led to, had to give this order, which led to release of prisoners, and that was huge in its impact. So that was, the government already had data, NGO did not have data, but together it worked out. It led to the impact that was desired by organizations and also the people the organization is working for. Similarly, when you talk about NGO academia collaboration, for example, I would say when I was working with this particular project on human trafficking, we were collecting data in really remote areas of India from the most underprivileged, disadvantaged communities, and there really small organizations, they wanted to come on board in terms of, we are partnering with you, okay, please credit us with this thing that we are partnering with you in terms of collecting data, because they wanted their good work to have a wider impact through this academic organization, TIS Mumbai. And they also wanted to kind of bring their solutions as well as problems to a wider platform, which was very difficult for them to otherwise reach, because they are somewhere sitting in a very remote corner, and it would have been very, very difficult. Very recently, one of the things that is taking a lot of coming up in India is there are a number of new data analytics social enterprises like Social Co-ops Outline India, etc., which are partnering now with small grassroots organizations to provide tools as well as expertise and capacity building so that the grassroots organization people can themselves collect data in their own communities to create data-driven solutions. And that's something which is picking up. And such kind of collaboration is very, very important. But while I suggest that such collaboration, such hand-holding is really important in India, what is more important, what I want to really, really emphasize here is that people and communities know their problems best. They know their stories best. And therefore, when any kind of collaboration, anybody who is holding anybody's hand, they need to be aware of the fact that people should be the center of not only data creation, but also data sharing. So by which I mean, it is, when we see data from, top up there, I'm sitting in a data analytics firm and trying to create some data for a certain problem which is affecting a large population in country, I might be seeing it as a technical process. Okay, let me frame a proposal, let me collect data through these many tools and all of that. But when people are sitting there who are giving me that data, those people are, for them, it's not a process, it's not a technical, series of events. For them, it's their stories that they are sharing, it's the solutions that they are seeking. So it is high time that we have ethical research processes which are leading to beneficiary driven data. So when I'm saying that, I don't only mean that include people in data collection, I am saying that also include people in designing researches. Ask people what is the data they want to be known about them. For example, sex workers might not be wanting to have a certain study about them. They might be having some other idea, but we approach them with a certain perspective which wants to ask certain questions and include their expect their collaboration on that. And all of that is very, very problematic and can lead to very, very skewed data that we might have about that particular population we are trying to study. Then here, when I'm talking about people-centric data collection, I want to mention this example. So there is this organization called Center for Equity Studies. They have a program called Misal, where they're empowering locals to build knowledge about them. They go to the community, ask them, what is it that you would want to know about? What is it that you would want people to know about you? They engage them in the whole process of designing. And when that is happening, if one woman joins that team, which is being trained to do this thing, other women come together, and they're doing it in a community where women just don't come out, to participate in that. So nobody would have ever known without this kind of approach, what exactly is it that women want to be known about them. So while it is important that we have people-centric data collection, it is also, I really want to emphasize on this, data needs to be shared as well. When we have created data, more often than not, what happens is it is the people who are least impacted by a particular problem get to, understand it, make meaning of it more. And the people who the knowledge is about, they are the last to know about it. So if required, de-identify the data, but it should be more of a norm rather than a qualification when we are sharing this data that we are creating by keeping people at center. Next slide, please. Okay, so when I said earlier that people and communities know their stories best, they also know their solutions best. And we need to be mindful of that as well when we approach them. So this is just one of the examples of indigenous innovation that we found in this particular study. So there was this village in which there were a large number of people who were migrating to cities, and they were not getting back. They were not in contact with their families for years, and then once they had left, they would not come back, and they were just missing people. So while the villagers could not find those people, because they didn't have any contact, what they decided was, okay, going ahead, we are going to keep this one paper register in our local village panchayat office, where anybody who leaves the village who work in a city now on will give the details of who he or she is living with, who they are, what is the contact in the city, what is the contractor or the company they'll be working with, some sort of details, so that tracking of those people, if at all they go missing, becomes, doable. And we found that during our study that it was an excellent tool in the hands of police once, police was trying to find if it was a case of human trafficking, bonded labor, etc. So this particular practice of keeping migrant registers in their villages, just a copy, where they just mention in the pencil or pen. It was being replicated after they learned from our study and other government anchored meetings, etc., that it was being replicated in other blocks and villages as well. Now, next I want to talk about this one thing which my research director told me when I was trying to discuss this particular meeting with her, and she said that information stored with humans, institutional knowledge stored with experiences, it is not recorded anywhere. And when it comes to small organizations, it is very important knowledge, because that data that they have in their heads because of the experiences over years, it's very, very important that is shared with each other. So what can be possibly done in such a case is that all those small organizations come together, have some sort of a peer learning meeting like we are having right now. And that's a wonderful way of learning from each other, sharing the problems, sharing the possible solutions, without actually needing a lot of funds to do a particular research, which might come up with some results 6 months later or something. So it is something which can be very cost effective, especially something which is needed by small grassroots organizations in India. So that is what is there. Lastly, I want to talk about technology. And though in case of India, in case of grassroots, it is very, very difficult to replace in-field interactions, in face-to-face communications with technology. It can be it has potential to help build data, share data about people, so that solutions are speedy. At the same time, I want to, even though we are seeing that we had a study at Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy, which kind of found that funders are showing a lot of enthusiasm in investing in technological innovations. So they are giving more money to Indian organizations to use technology to kind of do their work. And it is amazing. And there are a number of organizations which have started to use technology to, for example, say, development alternatives is tracing water levels to prepare people for future in drought-prone areas, etc. At the same time, it's very important to know that technology in case of a place like India can be dividing as well. I am a PhD. If somebody comes to collect census data with a tab, I'll be very, very suspicious of that person. I would still be, comfortable giving my information about my house or household or my income to a person who comes with a paper register. So that's and also I'm not comfortable. I can imagine the level of comfort or discomfort that people at the grassroots would be having. So it is all of this has to, technology. We have to find a way where technology becomes an enabler rather than something which further divides a country like India. So that is all from my side, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nia. Very, very thoughtful and rich presentation. I'll come to some of the questions that are already in the chat around transparency. And I found them interesting, Malala, because we love the idea of transparency, but you yourself couldn't share the data on the slide with us today. And you had to anonymize them. So is a transparency behind closed doors. So I think it's an intermediate stage. Can you reflect on that? Do you think there is a future where transparency is more open and other organizations can see it?
We will be fully transparent and also via INDIGO once the project is finalized. That's the aim of the investors, which is quite generous because there'll be full disclosure through INDIGO. But until the final results are achieved, because of the volatility of the context, the numbers are changing all the time. So both the level of results gets adjusted on a weekly basis, and also the level of repayment that investors gets adjusted because we have almost 60% inflation rate. So it doesn't make sense to share the picture while it's still being built, given the volatility of the context. If we were operating in Chile or in, I don't know, Uruguay or in another country in the region that is a little bit more stable, we could potentially share more. But yeah, I think investors, maybe it is a particular set of investors we had over there who are the ultimate owners of the data. Their aim was to showcase this so that the government could use the tool moving forward to become more efficient. And that comes with full transparency. If you cannot make your data transparent, it'll be complicated for the government to also learn from that.
Tracy, do you want to share your comment? You said that organizations are very reluctant and scared of sharing information. We experienced this also in the UK. We are looking at various projects that are delivering on contracts in the UK, and we have access to the data, but only a portion of this data is put out in the public domain because there is this discomfort of the image that you project. And do you see the same in small, large charities? Do you see a way out?
I think that the better established the charity, at least in how we're working now, the more confident the organization is to share some of the data that they're producing, probably also because they are the ones that are getting better results. But even with one of the largest charities that we work with, one has very good results and one has mediocre results, if you like, at least in 2 of the 4 indicators. But when you look at so they balance themselves off as time goes by and as you look at the more complex indicators to achieve. So it's the way that one organization works versus the other is a lot more sophisticated, and it takes more time to deliver results. And we're beginning to see that now. So I think that by the end of it, they will feel equally confident to share the data that this project is producing. In terms of data and this fear of showing data, I think it has to do with the fear of funding for charities. It has to do with the fear of portraying a picture that might be perceived as you're not doing as good a job as your peer. And if your peer is not being fully transparent with data as well, then you're risking the fact of being perceived as less efficient and then getting less funding for the work that you're trying to do. Hence why people are so careful with data. And on the side of the investors, the only reason why they're scared of sharing data is not public, but media, media reprisals against them because they were being repaid for outcomes, which is the whole name of the game in this case. But yeah, it's very easy, and it's the same thing when we were designing the SIB and we were talking with social finance in the UK. Investors over here with the first SIBs had the same fear, and it's if you're being paid by the government because of the investment that you made to deliver social results, you're making money out of people's taxes, and that's badly perceived. And if the media spins the story around, you're done. It takes a lot of time to undo. So they're very scared of that. They're not necessarily scared of sharing the data. They're scared of the media.
Thank you, Malala. I would like to come to Niha. There is an interesting question for you on the use of technology and from Elle. And if you can share some of your experience and insights.
What exactly is the question? I'll be able to better answer the question.
Thanks, Niha. You talked about the tensions potentially and nervousness around using tech sometimes to collect data. Are there any good examples, any exciting examples that you have seen where this space between local know-how and technology has been used sensitively?
So, see, the thing here is that when we're talking about technology, we're seeing technology mostly from the perspective of the people who would be collecting data. And the moment you bring in a tool which does not make sense to the community for whom the data is most directly impactful, for whom it is most directly, linked to, I feel we lose that connect which needs to be there, which should be the essence of data collection process. So, I understand that, technology is some sort of a norm in rest of the world, especially Western part of the world. It continues to be something which is, which is largely used by youth in our country. And then we also have issues of behavior is one thing. Even if somebody wants to, kind of participate in that data collection, and somebody might want to convince you of all the they might be making you secure about how this might be the best way of collecting data, etc. I think it is very difficult to build that behavior among people where they're less suspicious of technology. They're very, very suspicious of technology, and it is something which is true for out of billions of people in India. So in such a condition, it is very, very difficult to. And the moment we do that, I think we are somehow trying to say that, okay, technology is a better way of doing things. And we may be wrong there. It might be making my life easy as a data person. It might not be making their life easy. Maybe I am putting them into a very, very difficult situation where they are not comfortable enough to share their life stories with a person who has come with a tab. So that, there is this sense of disconnect. There is this sense of, and also we are somehow making them uncomfortable about the fact that they do not know something which maybe they should be knowing. Maybe we are projecting that sense on them. And I think all of that is not good for, creating beneficiary-driven data. I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thank you so much, Nia. We are coming up to the end of the hour. There is a technical question for you, Neha, from Tracy. I'll let you answer in the chat on potential risk of creating mistrust in technology in India. I just want to put a couple of dates in your diary before thanking everybody. Juliana or Mayra, can you show us these appointments for us to remember?
Yes. So as a last message, we would like to invite you to join our Hack and Learn, which is going to start on the 23rd of August. Mayra has already gone through our challenges, but if you want, you can get into our website and take a look at what are the things that we want to address this time. And of course, we want to let you know that we are having our Social Outcomes Conference on the 9th and 10th of September. It is going to be a hybrid conference, so it's going to be online and it's going to be in person at the same time at the Vlavanis School of Government. There are 16 sessions covering 5 core themes. But again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over the themes, but I invite you to go get into the GoLab website and see the program of the conference, which is really, really interesting this year.
Thank you so much, Juliana. I want to thank everybody. I thought the conversation today was very, very helpful because by looking at small organization, that really forced us to think about the effort of gathering data, and you really need to think about why are you doing it and how can you explain to people why this is helpful and what are the benefits of doing that. The benefit is not you writing a shiny report that you produce to government, but is to improve some practice. And so in small organization, this is very, very visible, and this was very thought-provoking. So I want to thank all our speakers. Thank you to all the participants for the great question. And we hope to see you at the Hack and Learn. And as I decided we will say from now on, stay indigo.
Thank you, Mara, and everyone.
Bye. See you.
Bye. See you. Thank you.
Everyone, good to see you all.
Thanks, everyone.